Welcome to the It Was a Thing on TV podcast. This is the first episode, submission number 001, Match Game Hollywood Squares Hour, which ran from October 31st of 1983 until July 27th of 1984 for a total of 191 episodes. Greg, you got your Hollywood Squares in my match game.
Mike, you got my match game in my Hollywood Squares.
Two great tastes that taste great together. Nothing could go wrong with this, right? Unlike Reese's Cups, two great tastes don't necessarily go together that well. Match Game in Hollywood Squares had long lives from the 60s through the early 80s, each lasting over 15 years. So they're two probably of the most popular game shows in history, and then somebody somewhere at NBC said, hey, let's combine the two of them together.
It was like combining nuts and gum.
It was good in theory. I mean, seriously in theory, but there were some little rules changes, or not necessarily rules changes, but mindsets that Mark Goodson had, which really made the show not that good, or at least part of the show not that good. First, the hosts of the shows, you had Gene Rayburn, who reprised his hosting from Match Game, which he hosted back in the 60s up until the eventual cancellation of the syndicated show in 1982. He came back to do Match Game, which is perfect because he's Mr. Match Game. But they couldn't get Peter Marshall to do Hollywood Squares. Maybe not couldn't, or maybe they just didn't want to get Peter Marshall for Hollywood Squares. From what I've read online, somebody at NBC originally planned to have Gene Rayburn hosting both parts, which would have been interesting. I think Gene Rayburn would have been the perfect foil for the comedy if they utilized zingers, which we'll get into later. Instead, there was an edict that they wanted two hosts, and so did they bring along a host who's had some experience running a game show? Absolutely not. Who did they get, Greg?
They got Bowser from Sha-Na-Na.
John Bowman from Sha-Na-Na. And maybe one of the good things is he didn't play host in the Bowser character. He was actually formally dressed, didn't have the slick back greaser hairstyle from the 50s. To call him wooden would be an offense to Wood. He was real stiff, used the same lines all the time, couldn't really ad-lib. He was a competent player at the Match Game part, but his hosting on Hollywood Squares was robotic, to say the least.
Well, when you watch the original version of Squares, like, Peter Marshall moves the game along. Whenever you watch the Match Game Hollywood Squares Hour on Buzzer, as has been starting to air the last couple weeks, I mean, when you watch John, it's like he's not moving the show along. I don't know if as they get along in the Buzzer run of the show as we go into the next 6 or 7 months, if it gets better or not, but it's kind of you gotta move it along. You gotta keep it going a little bit.
Indeed, the stars got a little hammy, and even on an episode earlier this week, which was from the third week of the show, John Bauman actually tells the stars, like move along, move along. The champion's trying to catch up or whatever. And even the other celebrities, they took their match game blank cards and started writing stuff about, this is going to take some time or move along or whatever. So even the celebrities involved with the game knew that other celebrities were hamming it up too much, which may have been fun in the studio, but really was just a time waster and a nuisance. And and honestly, it's from people that you really, well, I shouldn't say people, but at least one person you wouldn't expect. Fred Travellina was bad at doing this, just wasting time doing impressions. And yes, we know you can do Ronald Reagan, and we know that you're the man of 1,000 voices. But we're playing a game here. This isn't your stand-up. This isn't your comedic set. But the one that really surprised me, and she never did this on any other show, was Edie Mcclurg.
Oh yeah, you really had a problem with this.
Yeah, Edie Mcclurg, she had been on the original Match Game. Well, not the original, but the 70s version of Match Game and the 80s, the syndicated version.
I was going to say, Mike, did you have a time machine and you saw all the 60s episodes of Match Game?
I don't want to reveal my secret about my TARDIS. But she played it straight. She wasn't this goofy acting out character, and she also played other games. She was on Match Game in 1990 and 91. She was pretty sure she was on Win, Lose, or Draw, other shows of that era, because she was doing the Hogan Family / Valerie / whatever it was called that week. So she made the rounds, but she was just like off the just crazy, just acting really bizarre, goofy faces, goofy voices. And we really didn't understand them. I mean, there's no backstory. She doesn't have any characters. She's not doing an impersonation. She's just acting sort of like a ditzy valley girl. But yeah, that was one really bad thing about the Hollywood Squares portion. The other is that Mark Goodson sort of didn't follow suit with how Hollywood Squares ran for the previous 15, 16 years, where you had zingers, little comedic lines, because Mark Goodson was, he didn't want to feed the celebrities the answers, because that sort of smelled to him like why television and game shows in general got in trouble in the late 50s.
Yes. And if you watch the original Hollywood Squares again, the Paulin zingers, the little things by the celebrities after a question is revealed, and the funny joke, and then here's the real answer, and then the contestant says, "Do you agree or disagree?" That was a formula that worked for on NBC for 14, 15 years, and Goodson's no.
Yeah, exactly. And so what do we get instead? Which one's older, Dolly Parton or the pop-up toaster? Okay, first, what does Dolly Parton have in common with a pop-up toaster? Well, now that I think about it, yeah, she had things that popped out, not necessarily popped up, but well, we're going to try and keep this at a clean rating.
Yeah, we don't want that explicit rating on iTunes.
Absolutely not.
We're going to get the explicit rating in 3 shows.
But yeah, I mean, the questions were like that. It was either this or that, or you had 3 choices, A, B, or C. It wasn't really, there were open-ended questions, but they really relied, especially in the first 3 weeks that we've seen, which is older, A or B. And there was usually some connection between A and B. it's just not a fun game. Plus, also, yeah, not yeah, there aren't the funny lines that we mentioned. The zingers. Gene Rayburn takes the Hollywood Squares portion really seriously. He does not goof around there. He explains his answers. He's very thorough. And it's not necessarily because there are no zingers. I think he's just that type of person.
Although he really did have a good line in week 2 about, was it Tom Kennedy singing?
Oh, that was a great bluff. The question had to do with which game show host was a singer for the Cheers back, I think, in the 50s or 60s. And Gene Rayburn mentioned Tom Kennedy's baritone singing voice, which fooled the contestant. But obviously that wasn't like a handwritten line that Mark Goodson or one of the writers would have given him. That was something he came up with on the top of his head. And admittedly, Bert Convy really has never been the most popular game show hosts. He did Tattletales. He did Super Password. He hosted the Match Game pilot in 1990, and then he unfortunately... Oh, he also did Win, Lose, or Draw, but then it's like, what else is there? And unfortunately, he passed away shortly after the Match Game pilot was aired in not aired, but recorded in 1990. But yeah, the Match Game part was the Match Game we know and love. Maybe there weren't really definitive answers. Maybe the writing wasn't up to par, but it was the same game that the PM version used. I believe it was in the last... was it from the start of PM that they played 3 rounds, or was that started when the Star Wheel came around?
It might be the syndicated version. They played 3 rounds.
No, syndicated played 2 because there's 2. Then the Star Wheel, and then they brought back both contestants, did 2 more rounds Star Wheel. Then they got rid of both contestants and brought 2 new contestants aboard.
Okay, so then it would have been PM.
It was PM. I just don't know if it was in the beginning or if that was added on after the first season, or if it came around in 78 with the Star Wheel. But regardless, they played the Match Game PM version essentially in the main, the Match Game portion outside of the tiebreaker, which we'll get to in a second. So it was just, usual pick A or B. Here's the question. And they included some of the old characters from the Match Game that we know and love. They had Dumb Dora and Old Man Periwinkle. And then there were some other characters, including one whose name got bleeped this week because of a term regarding short people.
Oh yeah, Billy Barty's estate would not be very happy.
Yeah. Just a hint for those of you who are out of the loop. It rhymes with Gidget.
Sally Field?
Close enough. So yeah, the game played as normal, and they usually got through either 5 or 6 questions. So yeah, sometimes the games ended in a 6-6 tie, or just a tie in general. It doesn't have to be 6-6. And they played a new tiebreaker. And I actually like this one. I don't know how you feel about it, Greg.
I like it.
What they did is, instead of doing tiebreaker questions, or what they did in the syndicated version, which would be ask an open-ended question, contestants would write down their answers, and the first one to match a celebrity would win. They gave 4 predetermined answers that would fill in the blank, and by number 1, 2, 3, or 4, the contestant would say, "I'd like number 2," or "I'd like number 4," or number 3. And basically it played out the same way. The celebrities would give their answers, and then the first one to match would win, which I could see for time purposes that being good. It's not bad. I mean, it's actually sort of clever, but the issue leads to going through 3, 4, 5 celebrities until you get a right answer. And even on the first tiebreaker, one of the celebrities had matched one of the answers that wasn't picked. I think it was the third celebrity. I forget who it was, but they just played on, and it went another one or two people until, oh, I got this predetermined answer I chose. Not bad, but obviously not good because you're sort of limiting the choices for the contestants. And then after that, we get the big transition. We go from Match Game to Hollywood Squares. The back of the second tier and the entire third tier swings into place, which really was something back in 1983.
Mike, it was very impressive in 1983. But I will say this: in 2019, when I see the rotation and they add the set on, the next part of the set on, I can't help but get the urge to say, let's rotate the board.
I knew you were going to make a Number Wang reference. Beautiful. Beautiful. Well, let's sort of halfway rotate the board. and then
it's very impressive because you've got, it's not like the original Hollywood Squares or the Davidson or the Bergeron version where you had the massive squares with like the stairways and everything. I mean, you have this nice stairway, but I mean, the way it looks on camera, it looks like when you see the whole set together with the squares that light up and everything, it looks like, you don't even notice it.
The best comparison, I don't know if you've seen this, is if you've ever watched Hip Hop Squares on VH1. It's basically the same thing, except obviously with 2017, 18, 19 technology, they have these LCD monitors instead of, I'm guessing, what would be slide projections back in 83. Slide projections are some sort of, I don't know if it was slide projections, but they lit up the square and you had some cutout of an X or an O. It's sort of the same thing in that regard. But yeah, I mean, that technology was amazing in 1983. And we're going to get back to that in a second because that was mind-blowing back in the day. Hollywood Squares, like we said, there weren't zingers, and there were some gameplay differences, which helped speed up the game. I actually think they were good for speeding up the game.
Yes.
But also at the same time, you needed to speed up the game a little bit because you had a lot of padding and hamming it up from the celebrities. The big difference was when you are in a situation to block a square, if you get it wrong, your opponent automatically gets a square. Doesn't have to earn it himself or herself. So that led to quicker games somewhat. I mean, there's some episodes of Match Game Hollywood Squares where they got through at least 3 full games, if not even a 4th full game. Because, I mean, some of the scores we've seen just in the first 3 weeks, there's been $900, $950, $1,025. But then also we've seen some shows where there's not much right answers happening, and or not many right answers happening. I speak a good English.
Thanks, Wes.
There's a Wes Welker joke. I speak Spanish. But the games would last so long that they'd only play maybe 1.5 games. So you'd have winning scores of $250 or $300. But also, there's just been some bad gameplay because there was an episode, not this past week, but the second week of the series, where there was exactly one right answer in the first 11 questions.
Oh, and Gene basically spoke for everybody. This is a dumb off if I've ever seen one.
Yeah, I mean, Gene Rayburn pulled out the dumb off line from Match Game. 1 out of 11, and I believe the one correct answer in the group actually won game 1. So, yeah, I mean, you can attribute that to bad gameplay, just bad luck, especially, again, since we said a lot of the questions are binary choices. Is it A or is it B? Oh, I'll choose B. Wrong, it's A. Opponent gets the square. And yeah, that actually takes me back to John Bauman when I said he was stiff and just couldn't ad-lib. You were right to agree. You are right to disagree. You are wrong to agree. You are wrong to disagree.
You should have disagreed.
You should have disagreed. It's like, okay, there's more than one way of saying that. You come off as robotic, and I don't even remember Peter Marshall ever saying you were wrong to agree or you were right to disagree. It was always, give the answer, circle gets the square, X gets the square. It seemed like John was maybe even trying a little hard, trying to maybe get a catchphrase. But yeah, he was no Peter Marshall. So the games would play until a certain time, a certain number of minutes, and then you'd hear a loud school bell, very reminiscent of a loud school bell, not the corny buzzer or tacky buzzer that was used on Hollywood Squares, the original run.
No, it's the bell they got from the Saved by the Bell opening later.
I don't think you're wrong there. I think it might be the same bell. If Hollywood Squares ended in a tie, they would go to a tie-breaking question, just like the original show used to do. After that, the winner went on to the super match for a chance to win up to $30,000.
What?
Yeah, $30,000, and that was some really good money. That's good money now, but that was like amazing money back in 1983. Especially considering the match game, when it came back in 73, the top prize was $5,000. Then it was up to $10,000 when the Star Wheel came along, and the PM version went $10,000 to $20,000. $30,000 was big bucks, and I believe you figured out how much this was. It's worth nowadays through the inflation calculators. It's worth something like $85,000 in our money. You did the math on like 62,800 and said it was like 175,000. So it's almost triple. So 30,000 would be like in the range of $85,000 to $90,000, which can get you a decent house nowadays, or maybe not decent, but considering how much mine cost, yeah, it could get you a house possibly.
Inflation calculator says $30,000 in 1983 and 2019 would be $77,337.05.
Okay, so you're talking Tesla money. 77,000. That's more than a lot of people make in a year. That's some good money. And so the game played similar, not exactly 100% the same as the 70s super match. You still had the top three answers on the board from a survey that was asked to the audience members. And instead of $500 for the top answer, $250 for the second, and $100 for the third, it was $1,000 for the top answer, $500 for the second, and $250 for the third. And if you bombed, and this actually is really a benefit, if you totally bombed, you still got $100.
You get money. You get money for doing nothing.
If they bombed out on the 70s match game PM version, they did a celebrity match where they went to all 6 celebrities, and if you matched them, you won $100. And actually, they ended up winning like I think $600. They swept the board, and it's like, okay, that's not really fair because somebody might only get the top answer and win $500, and you totally bombed it. And you won $600. But regardless, so $1,000 for the top answer, $500 for the second, $250 for the third. If you blow it, you still get $100 just so you can play the celebrity match. And actually, that does make sense. So it sounds, I know what you're saying. Oh, you blow it and you earn $100. But at the same time, it's not going to be 2 or 3 minutes of dead air at the end of the show. You're playing a celebrity match where the contestant still can win a nice $3,000. So, as I said, 4 of the celebrities have 10s, 4 of the celebrities have 20s, and 1 has a 30. And that's the multiplier that your winnings will be multiplied by. So 30 times $1,000 would be $30,000. And it even, getting a $10,000 back in the day I mean, that was like the base top prize on game shows, more or less. Everything was giving away $10,000 if you win, $10,000 if you get the bonus round or whatever, pretty much. And one person, and this just aired this week, happened to get the $30,000 not once, but twice, and on consecutive days.
Yeah, what are the odds, Mike, that you would win $30,000 on back-to-back shows?
Well, I mean, you're asking a math teacher. I don't want to get too deep into the math. I mean, obviously, the first thing you need to do, and there's no way you can put a percentage on it, is you need to get the $1,000 in the audience matches. But then you've got a 1 in 9 chance each time. So if to get the 30 on 2 consecutive tries is a ninth times a ninth, which is 1 out of 81. So that's a little bit over 1%. And again, you need to make sure that you win the audience match to get the $1,000 in order to even just qualify for possibly winning the $30,000. So it's, needless to say, a long shot.
Yes, it's very hard to get the one celebrity that has the 30 and have a shot at the $30,000. Although, as we've seen in the past 2 weeks and going back to when they had the preview week on Buzzer back in February of the episodes 2 through 5 in the first week, some of these answers are in 1983. If you're viewing it from 2019 odds, you can tell what the most popular answer was in 1983.
If you knew your pop culture references in 1983, you will make money. We've seen that just in the last 2 episodes. Real Blank. There was a very popular show back in the early 80s called Real People. And then Blank Blues. Big show that came around about a year earlier, maybe 2 years earlier, Hill Street Blues. And then Eddie Blank. Biggest movie star probably at the time in 1983-84 was Eddie Murphy. Flash Blank, biggest movie in 83 without a doubt was Flash Dance. So as long as you know your pop culture references, you're really almost guaranteed to make money.
Yeah,
I mean, I'm sorry, I want to hear what you're going to say, then I'm going to tell you what I was going to say.
It seemed like NBC really wanted to make subliminal references to all their hits, because you have Hill Street Blues, you have Real People, and also you have Eddie Murphy, who was on SNL at the time.
Yes, he was. So yeah, and that's something that you could really tell throughout the show is NBC was really grasping for straws, trying to push their shows. A lot of the celebrities were from NBC shows at the time. And we'll just go through the first week, the celebrities from the first week, and you'll see how many were on NBC shows at the time or just finished an NBC show. So Skip Stevenson was a correspondent on Real People. Allison Arngrim, just a few months earlier, Little House on the Prairie got ended. I'm not going to say canceled because I don't think it would have ever gotten canceled, but it ended. And so, and where was Little House on the Prairie? NBC. Jimmy Walker. Jimmy Walker, I think, and I'm sure you'd agree, Greg, was looking for a paycheck in 1983.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Good Times was over.
Good Times was over, and his dynamite catchphrase was sort of like waning in popularity.
Yeah, it would. That phrase wouldn't be like useful on television until AEW said, "What should we name our show?" And then they were probably watching Good Times and heard Jimmy Walker say Dynamite, like, Dynamite! That's it!
It's a good thing they weren't watching What's Happening. Hey!
AEW rerun just does not sound very good.
AEW, hey! We get to one of Greg's favorites now, Twyla Littleton. She appeared in some shows. She was never a big star. The we'll get into Twyla in a little bit with a theory that I have regarding celebrities. Phil Proctor. What was Phil Proctor doing in 1983? Because, as you've mentioned, he was the voice of the father on Rugrats, but that wouldn't be for another 8 years or so.
He was the father of Phil and Lil.
Yeah, but what was he doing in 1983?
That's the question we have with a lot of these celebrities when we see the episode guides. Like, what the heck were some of these celebrities doing?
And honestly, I'm just doing a little search on Wikipedia, which of course is a great academic reference. Use it forever, kids. No, don't trust me because I'm a teacher and I've seen too much wacky stuff go on with students citing Wikipedia. Let's see. In terms of television shows, Richie Rich would have been around that time.
Wait, there was a live-action Richie Rich?
No, animated version. Animated.
That's not like Gene Wood can say from Richie Rich, Phil Proctor.
The Smurfs.
Okay, well, that's an NBC show.
That's an NBC show, exactly. And that would have started probably about 82, 83, and was definitely probably the most popular cartoon on NBC at the time. That's all I can see for that time frame. He did announce on Big Brother for 3 seasons. I didn't know that. That's sort of a surprise to me. But yeah, so Phil Proctor, who went on to decent stuff. Again, you may not know the name, but you know the voice for sure. And then Tom Villard, who was on We've Got It Made, NBC show. And then Barbie Benton, who we'll get into my special category in a second.
Yeah.
And then finally Bill Daly, who was a regular on Match Game in the 70s and the early 80s. So, I mean, he almost has like, just like carte blanche to go to Match Game whenever he wants. Yeah, he wouldn't have been on the Bob Newhart show. That would have been canceled years before. So at least you had some old family members, if you will, visiting the new show. And
to their credit, they did bring Charles Nelson Riley back for a couple of weeks. They brought Fannie Flagg. They even brought back George Gobel for a week from Hollywood Squares and Abby Dalton back for a week from Hollywood Squares. So they did try to make some connections with both shows.
Yeah, and one thing that I've noticed is the celebrities who are good on Hollywood Squares were horrible on Match Game, and essentially vice versa. I mean, they are two diametrically opposed games. One is actually sort of knowledge-based, and the other is, can your mind be on the same wavelength as somebody else? So it was sort of catastrophic in that regard, trying to see George Gobel play Match Game when he was absolutely not a good player at it. But also, George Gobel didn't have the zingers. That goes back to what we talked about earlier. I mean, George Gobel could do a heck of a zinger, but the problem is when Mark Goodson says, we're not doing zingers, then you're sort of grasping at straws. So, yeah, some of the old timers were back, and they did try introducing new timers or new people. And obviously there was a lot of promotion for the NBC shows because we just mentioned that 3 of the celebrities, at least in the premiere week, were on NBC shows at the time or just ended their runs on NBC shows. And yeah, they did similar, they did weeks. There was a St. Elsewhere week, and they had 8 cast members from St. Elsewhere. But also they promoted other shows too. They had a Too Close for Comfort week.
That was awesome.
Which is good, except Too Close for Comfort only has really 5 stars. So you had to fill in other slots with Arsenio Hall and
Bart Braverman.
Yeah, Bart Braverman, and I forget who the token female was that week. I'm looking at it right now. Oh, it was Elise Knight. It was Ted Knight's daughter.
Oh, that's nice.
Who I don't even think was on the show. I used to watch Too Close for Comfort reruns quite a bit the last number of years, and I don't remember Elise Knight being on the show. But also 1 week, there's also a 50s week, a tribute to the 50s with Fabian, and I actually remember this when it originally aired for some reason. Fabian and other 50s celebrities were in the on the panel, but the 1 week, which might be the most maybe famous / infamous week, which we should see in about 6 weeks, so right around Thanksgiving, maybe a little bit after, was from December 26th to December 30th of 1983. It was a tribute to Leave It to Beaver. And the people who were on the panel that week, you had Jerry Mathers as the Beav. You had Barbara Billingsley, who played the mother. She played June. And then Frank Bank, who played Lumpy. And some other names I don't forget, or don't remember who they played on the show, but Jerry Weil and Rich Carell and Richard Deacon, who are all on Leave It to Beaver. And then you have the ninth celebrity. Ninth celebrity after you include John Bauman or Gene Rayburn. And who symbolizes Leave It to Beaver better than... Say it, Greg.
Gallagher.
I get Gallagher was a big comic back in 1983. He had a lot of specials on Showtime, and he was known for using his sledgehammer to absolutely pound melons into submission. But Gallagher has nothing to do with Leave It to Beaver. I mean,
Mike, you think that after each show, like he would, at the end of the Friday show, they'd have Gallagher do the watermelon smash?
You'd think they would. Seriously, you brought him on there. What's he known for? He's known for smashing watermelons.
And we've all talked about this. The week they had St. Elsewhere, you think Howie Mandel did the rubber glove trick on his head at least once that week?
That was his thing. Now, we've only seen one episode from that week, so there's a possibility he may have done it later on in the week as a time killer. But, yeah, you'd think that, these comics would do stuff that they're known for. It almost feels like, oh, hey, we have an empty seat. Let's see who we can get here for five episode tapings on a weekend. Oh, look, Gallagher's in town. He's doing the Chuckle Hut or whatever in Laguna Beach. Okay, let's get Gallagher on. Makes no sense.
No, I think it makes perfect sense.
Gallagher has nothing to do with Leave It to Beaver.
Maybe he's a big fan of Leave It to Beaver, Mike.
Well, who's not a fan of Leave It to Beaver? But, I mean, that just doesn't mean, okay, I'm a big fan of Leave It to Beaver. Hey, let's call up this, no-name schmo from the audience and let him play the game. It just... It's like mixing oil and water. It just doesn't mesh. It doesn't combine. But yeah, so that was one of the more interesting pairings, maybe in history. Honestly, the Leave It to Beaver week with Gallagher. Another thing about the celebrities, and I mentioned this earlier with Twyla Littleton and Barbie Benton, is we noticed that, or at least I noticed, that there's like a token bimbo of the week on almost every panel, at least for the first maybe 3 months. Examples. I'm going to put Twyla Littleton in there, even though it doesn't say anywhere that she did any sort of magazines. But Barbie Benton certainly did. Week 2, Shannon Tweed certainly did.
And week 3, we all know, even though there really isn't anyone that you consider a bimbo, by default, Lydia Cornell was the bimbo of the week.
No! Take that back. Lydia Cornell played a college student on Too Close for Comfort. How dare you say that?
Listen, I love Lydia Cornell. I love her, but we didn't have a bimbo. We had to have someone occupy that seat. We had to have someone be the acting bimbo.
Well, I'm going to give Greg credit there because the other two females on the panel that week were Edie Mcclurg, who's definitely not a token bimbo, and Gloria Loring, who is Robin Thicke's mom.
Yes.
But then we go on, week 4. Rebecca Holden. Guess what she was in? She was in Playboy. Week 5. You don't have anybody really, in terms of a token bimbo, somebody who may have been in adult magazines. But Audrey Landers is certainly, I mean, she's beautiful. She's a little, let's say, lightheaded. I don't want to be mean and stereotype blondes, but let's just say her blonde side was coming out. And that's just on we haven't seen Match Game Hollywood Squares how she did, but just based on her track record on the regular Match Game back in the late 70s and early 80s. And then Karen Witter's another one. That's week 6. Vicky McCarty was in Playboy, week 7. Don't ask me how I know these people are in Playboy. I got it on Wikipedia. Wink, wink, wink. Victoria Holman, I believe, was a model of some sort and might have done it. And then you've got the week of Leave It to Beaver. And then just like some of the other names, just people I've never heard of, and some people that don't even have any sort of like Wikipedia page or real entry in IMDb outside of Christine Claridge was best known for Match Game Hollywood Squares, parentheses, 1984. So, yeah, I mean, just look at the names. Christine Claridge. Jenny Lee Harrison was on week 11. She was actually on Three's Company, and she was not a ditzy bimbo.
No,
even though you may want to classify her as one for that week. But just looking at the listings for every week, there's invariably one name, and it's usually a female name that I've never heard of. And I'm not going to stereotype by calling them ditzy bimbos, because actually after looking at some of the names yesterday, they were soap opera stars. And obviously that was sort of a demographic they were trying to get to watch the show, because Match Game Hollywood Squares Hour aired at 3 p.m., at least Eastern. So that was the perfect time for the soap opera watchers, for the General Hospital watchers, and the whatever would have been on CBS at the time, As the World Turns, I believe. So, yeah, they're trying to bring in those viewers too. But, yeah, just like I said, there's like invariably one name that I've never heard of. But they did get some interesting celebrities. They did.
Oh, yes.
Some of the names that you may not have recognized back then, but are definitely recognizable now. Jay Leno did a couple of weeks. As much as we may hate saying that name. And Arsenio Hall did a number of weeks.
Yes. Unfortunately, I wish Burton Richardson had been there to introduce him.
That would have been good. That would have been epic.
Oh, man.
But
imagine the crowd in NBC Burbank doing the woo, woo, woo.
I don't know if they would have done the woo, 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 but yeah, extending that O out for like 10 seconds, that would have been great. But Burton was probably, 6 or 7 years away from announcing. I mean, Arsenio Hall would have been like 89, maybe 88. So that was easily 5-6 years away.
Well, hold up, Mike. Ed Begley Jr. established in week 2 he had a time machine.
No, Ed Begley Jr. was established. He was on St. Elsewhere.
No, I'm talking about the time machine he talked about in week 2.
Oh, jeez.
We talked about this. The tortoise that runs on vegetable oil.
Another inside joke. I'm sorry. But then week 10, which is the first full week of 1984. And we've actually tried looking into this to see what he was doing at the time. Why would he be on Match Game Hollywood Squares as a panelist? David Ruprecht.
Yes, David Ruprecht, who, of course, we all now know for Supermarket Sweep, for some reason is on the first week in 1984.
The only thing we could gather is in the last few episodes of Three's Company, he played somebody's boyfriend, I believe. But the thing is, those episodes probably would have aired like May of 84 or April of 84. And the only other thing I can think of that David Ruprecht would have done was he did that movie, the Harlem Globetrotters on Gilligan's Island or whatever it was.
Yes, he played Thurston Howell the Fourth.
Yeah, he played. Thurston Howell the Third or the Fourth. No, Thurston Howell the Third was on the TV show. Yeah, Thurston Howell the Fourth. So we're sort of stumped as to what David Ruprecht would have done in early '84 to merit a spot on the panel. And then just going through the list, looking for other names. As mentioned, Jay Leno already. We know who this person is. Bill Cullen.
Yes.
The legend. It's going to be interesting to see those shows because from what I've heard, Bill didn't walk across the stage for semi-obvious reasons if you know about Bill Cullen. So he just stood at his lectern, where he was sitting, and sort of gave a wave or may have stood up. Let's see here. Just going through this real fast to see if... Oh, Sally Julian. February of '84, Sally Julian. What was she doing? Because she was off Sale of the Century by that time, I believe.
I don't know. Maybe she was still under NBC contract.
Possibly, but there's another token bimbo of the week.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And then you had the usual stars coming on to pitch their shows. Bill Cullen would have pitched Hot Potato most likely. Bob Eubanks was on. He would have been pitching Dream House. Let's see here.
Were you waiting for me to make a Dream House joke?
Not really. I'm just looking through the list. But yeah, and then they brought on more stars for their new shows. They had Paula Kelly on, who was on Night Court. Richard Mall, who was on Night Court. Marky Post was on, but she would have been on The Fall Guy at the time.
Yeah, because who was the first attorney at the time?
That was Paula Kelly, I believe.
Okay.
Or Ellen Foley. Ellen Foley, I believe, was the first.
Okay.
Yes, so, Ellen Foley. Then it was Paula Kelly for the second season, I believe, or maybe. Well, it was either Paula Kelly or Ellen Foley. I think it was Foley first, or no, Ellen Foley. I'm sorry, Ellen Foley was who Mac Robinson was, the court reporter.
Okay.
So yeah, it may have been Paula Kelly first because Paula Kelly definitely was on this, and she was definitely on Night Court, at least for the first season, if not the second season or third season rather, until Marky Post became available because Fall Guy wasn't on there anymore.
Okay. And of course, Marky Post, forgot to mention, former Mark Goodson, Bill Todman employee.
She worked on Double Dare. She was a card turner occasionally on Card Sharks. Yeah, so she's totally familiar with the Mark Goodson family. There's actually no other names here that I see that we'd recognize as future stars. So there was a little bit of maybe untapped talent there. I mean, Jay Leno was a known commodity, love him or hate him, back in 1983. He was doing appearances on Carson and stand-up stuff. But one thing we haven't covered, the music.
Oh, yes. The music.
The music, I mean, this might be the most bombastic piece of game show music in history. with the horn section and just the way the open was. You have this big light board which literally stretches across the stage, or at least the visible part of the stage that you saw on TV, and it's flashing the names, and out comes the celebrity with their name in 20-foot high letter or 15-foot high letters, and the theme is just classic. I mean, once you hear it, you sort of get little tingles because you know you're in for something special.
Oh yes, and it's so the way Gene Wood, the famous Goodson Todman announcer, announces the show. It's time for the match game, Hollywood Squares, hour with, and then then you see the name pop up, and then the walks down. You're excited. Then the next name comes up, and then the next person walks down. You're excited. It makes it feel like this is going to be an epic show you're about to watch.
And this was like top of the line graphics probably in 1983. I mean, this is something that really that light board you saw in like 50 Grand Slam, kind of sorta back in 1976, but not to this degree. I mean, that light board was comparatively smaller, but still it was a very high-tech piece of machinery for 76. But yeah, that board, you knew you were in for something special, and I don't know, at least for me, I know you weren't around at the time, or at least if you were, you're in diapers, so you didn't really watch it per se.
I would have been 2 months pregnant with my mom would have been 2 months pregnant.
I would say you would have been 2 months pregnant? Boy, science is amazing.
No. Oh, Jesus.
But yeah, I was 9 years old at the time. Actually, at the start of the show in October of '83, I would have been 8. And I was in I would have been in 4th grade in 1983-84. And I remember we would be dropped off from school. It was probably about 2:50 to 2:55. So that was just enough time to kick off your shoes, turn on the TV, get a little comfortable, and here's the theme music, the epic theme music, and this big signage on stage. And even as a 8-year-old, 9-year-old, I recognized some of the names. There were names at the time. I mean, I used to watch Real People as a little kid, so I knew who Skip Stevenson was, and I heard of some of the other names, some of the other celebrities. Like I said, I didn't know anything about the adult magazines at the time, nor do I now. Wink, wink, wink. But like you said, you knew you were coming in for like something special. This is like akin to Price is Right. You've got the flashing light border. You've got Johnny Olsen saying, "Come on down." It's really one of the epic openings of game shows. Not that a game show would have lasted a longer time because they opened, but it's one of those that you remember. And speaking of the announcers, you mentioned Gene Wood. Gene Wood was the perfect announcer for that show, just like he was the perfect announcer for Card Sharks, at least the NBC version from 78 to 81. The reason I say that, he has like the timing and cadence down. He knew how to read the poems at the right, the right cadence, the right timing, and he knew when to do that on Card Sharks. He did the same here. Perfect timing. And I'll give you the counterexample for both of them. There was a while, I believe in 80 and maybe 81, when Gene Wood didn't announce because he was a busy guy at the time. He would have done Family Feud at the time. And not just Family Feud on daytime, but he also did the nighttime version.
Yes.
And this wouldn't have coincided with Card Sharks, but he did Child's Play at the time. Again, that's 82 to September of 83, so that's right before Match Game Hollywood Squares. But the thing is, he was a busy guy. I mean, you're talking about 10 episodes of Family Feud a week, plus 5 of Match Game Hollywood Squares, which is an hour-long show. So you're essentially doing you're doing 10 hours of shows per week, or the equivalent of 20 half-hour shows. That's a lot of work. So they brought in some substitute announcers. They had on Card Sharks, like Johnny Olson did a few episodes, and I think Jack Nars did a few episodes, or Art James, I think, did a few episodes. Bob Hilton did some, and they just didn't get that timing right. So you'd have like the poem read really quickly, and then you have on Card Sharks, and then like 3 seconds later they'd zoom into the logo. That's something that Gene Wood had down pat and was missing. And the same thing was true of Match Game Hollywood Squares Hour. There is footage online of one episode of Johnny Olson's announcing, and he just does not get the timing right. I mean, he's a great announcer, probably the best ever.
Oh, he's one of the legends.
He's one of the best, but the thing is, for the Hollywood Squares part, yeah, if you saw the light board on the back, there was a certain timing. It's the Match Game, and there's up flashes the name Match Game. Hollywood Squares, up flashes the name Hollywood Squares. Hour, the word hour flashes up. When Johnny Olson did this, it was, stay tuned for the second half of Match Game Hollywood Squares Hour. And you see the lights in the background. Match Game, Hollywood Squares, Hour. And he just totally screwed up the timing. Again, that might be just because Gene was just used to doing that show. I mean, obviously, we said there were 191 shows, and let's say Gene did at least 150 of them or 140 of them. You know the rhythm. You're used to it. Johnny Olson just didn't have it. But
it's one thing if it's The Price is Right. For Johnny, it's this person come on down, this person come on down, and then you're the next 4 contestants on The Price is Right. He's used to doing that formula for like so many times, and I'm sure if the reverse happened, it would feel weird. So I mean, when Johnny's placed into this other environment where you have someone who's established the rhythm of the show, it becomes very different and weird.
And that's exactly what I was just going to say. Johnny was in his environment at Price is Right. I mean, he had done it at that time 11 years. So, it's almost like riding a bicycle at that point for him. You put him on a different show with different pacing, he's probably not going to respond properly unless, Mark Goodson pulled him to the side and said, okay, you've got to do it this way, put a pause in. When you see this, do it again. Yeah, so it happens. I mean, but the thing is, Gene Wood was like the perfect host for it. And actually, speaking of Price is Right, the theme, people may remember it from Match Game Hollywood Squares, but for, I would say, almost the better part of 25 years, if you heard that theme on Price is Right, you knew you were playing for a very nice car. This wasn't like Chevy Chevelle or Ford Pinto or an AMC Gremlin type of car. You were playing for a Lincoln Town Car or a Corvette or something in that stratosphere. That was the bombastic theme used to say, hey, you're playing for a car that's worth $30,000, $35,000, not a little, $8,000 Geo Metro or something like that. And it's sad they got rid of that music. Not just that cue, but the entire package. But you knew something was special when you heard that music, when you heard the first couple notes. When you heard that, the first second, which you'd hear in the open to Match Game Hollywood Squares, you knew something big was happening.
Oh, yes.
And there's actually one last thing we haven't talked about yet. I know we're going a little long here. We wanted to do about an hour, but it's our podcast.
And also, Buzzer's been rerunning it recently the last 2 weeks with their new fall schedule. So.
Oh, and that's another thing we should add is, like, of all the entries that we're doing, this is probably one of the few that's actually being rerun on TV right now. So if you've got Buzzer on your system and want to catch this, it's on every weeknight at 10 o'clock Eastern, p.m. Eastern, and it also reruns on the weekends too. Definitely give it a look. I mean, this is it's a piece of history in some ways, and it's very polarizing. You either really love it or you really hate it. There really isn't like, it's sort of good. It's either you're diehard, oh, this is like, how did this last just 9 months? Or you're like, this should have been off the air by February of 84. But there's one last thing, and this sort of a segue into next week's episode. One thing that we've noticed as we watched these first 2 to 3 weeks of Match Game Hollywood Squares, as we said earlier, they're really pushing NBC shows. You've got Terry Copley or Tom Villard from We've Got It Made, or you've got this celebrity from this show. We said Skip Stevenson from Real People. One thing, and this may be either NBC, either just due to the amount of advertising for this show, or it might be maybe the network just told them, okay, we need you to promote this show because this show is so innovative and we need higher ratings. Or maybe it just somehow just made the circuit early on in November of 83 that this show was a dog. But there have been I'd say at least 4 references to a show called Mr. Smith.
Mr. Smith, yes. Oh.
And this is a show that, even though, like I said, it's gotten plenty of mentions, at least 4 or 5. I mean, there were even questions written about Mr. Smith on Hollywood Squares.
You could tell that they thought Mr. Smith was going to be a hit. This was like how in the early teens, how NBC thought, oh my God, everyone's gonna love Whitney Cummings. We gotta put 75% of our advertising behind this.
Yeah, I mean, this isn't unlike other shows you may be hearing about in the near future, possibly, where NBC or Fox or whatever network pushes like their entire advertising budget during the World Series or the Super Bowl or the Olympics, that you got to watch this new show when it comes out on September 28th, even though the Olympics are happening in July 28th. Oh, this show's so good, we're pushing it 2 months in advance. And it turns out to be a dog. It turns out to be a topic of this podcast. And there actually is an example of that, which may or may not come up in the near future. I'll mention it. Back in the 07 World Series, Fox was pushing the Rich List. Oh, there were so many advertisements for the Rich List. And the show lasted 1 episode. So, it's the same thing with Whitney. NBC was barraging us with Whitney. Whitney's the next big thing. Whitney. And that must have happened with Mr. Smith because, again, the celebrities are making mentions of Mr. Smith. There was a question about Mr. Smith in terms of what is Mr. Smith most likely going to do before he goes to sleep. Eat cookies and drink milk, or have relations with a female orangutan? The answer is cookies and milk. Sorry.
I think Mr. Smith would have been a much better show if he had like a female orangutan.
Oh, there might have been a Mrs. Smith. The problem is there's so little footage of Mr. Smith on YouTube, and we'll get into that the next installment. But it's just Mr. Smith. There was a question on Match Game about the dictionary. The definition of ugly has a picture of blank next to it, and what does Nidra Vold say? Mr. Smith. And I think that actually sort of started us on the Mr. Smith track. Who the heck is Mr. Smith? And we'll definitely get into who Mr. Smith is next week. But And also, it's kind of interesting because Mr. Smith is next week. Greg, who's a celebrity on Match Game Hollywood Squares reruns this week on Buzzer?
Oh, it's going to be Mr. Leonard Fry, Mike.
From Mr. Smith.
From Mr. I cannot wait because let's see, today as we're recording this, it's Sunday. So let me see. At the time we're recording this.
Wait. It's Saturday.
Oh, it's Saturday. I'm sorry. I got my days of the weekend mixed up.
Oh my gosh.
I'm sorry. I was in Ed Begley Jr.'s artist that runs on vegetable oil all week.
So correct me, Greg, if I'm wrong, but I believe as of the time we're recording this, we are 51 hours and 10 minutes away from hearing Gene Wood say, "From Mr. Smith, Leonard Fry."
Oh my God, that's gonna be so epic. Gene Wood has said some many great things in game show history. I mean, one thing we talked about was when Buzzer did the International Women's Day Marathon. They had the Family Feud 94 episode with Carol Burnett and Betty White, where he introduced it like a big prize fight.
Yes.
I'm sorry, but this when he says "from Mr. Smith, Leonard Fry," you know that those are going to be the 5 greatest words he's ever spoken in the history of the medium.
And we're not joking. We're really anticipating seeing this because, again, Mr. Smith is this big thing, NBC's big hit for fall of 1983, and it doesn't even see 1984. Which seems almost typical of most shows on NBC in 1983 because, not spoiling anything, there's more besides Mr. Smith, which you may or may not hear about in the near future. Let's just give it up. You're going to hear about these shows. They were still a year away from really hitting the jackpot with Cosby Show and Night Court. They still had
Mike, in the year 2019, the term "hitting the jackpot with Cosby" doesn't really mean
it does well, but the thing is, in a 1984 sense, it does. But I totally get what you mean. We don't want to give Mr. Cosby more credit than he deserves.
Oh no.
But the thing is, in 1984, his show was the thing, whether we want to admit it or not. So yeah, next week, Mr. Smith. You're going to go ape over it. Ha 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 ha. He's not an ape. He's an orangutan. So, yeah, we'll have that next week. In the meantime, we are on social media. We have plenty of presences. We are on Jack Dorsey's Twitter machine at twitter.com/ it was a thing on TV. I almost forgot the name of the podcast. Oh, my gosh. It was a thing on TV. We're also on Tumblr at itwasathingontv.tumblr.com. We're on Facebook at facebook.com/itwasathingontv. And you can find the podcast at itwasathingontv.podbean.com. So for Greg Diener, this is Mike Klaus. We'll see you next week when we talk about Mr. Smith.
You'll go ape.
It didn't work the first time. You'll go bananas for it. Bye-bye. Talk to you later. Greg, you got your Hollywood Squares in my match game.
Oh man. That just goes right together, doesn't it, Mike?
That's not the joke!
What? What's not the joke?
You got your peanut butter in my chocolate. You got your chocolate in my peanut butter.
Oh, okay.
So you say... Oh, God. Okay, we found an outtake for the end of the show.